All right. So if you're at home, Alderwoman Schweitzer needs to let her know if you can hear clearly now. Okay. Um, yeah, collaborative governance is hard. And not only are we trying to figure out collaborative governance, we are addressing a issue that is complex and that is, it's not simple. It's not a one-cut solution to it. We're trying to work with each other and work with our colleagues. We're trying to balance the varying perspectives of community. We're trying to work it out with other offices and having all of these important conversations together. So, I mean, even that's just a great example of collaborative governance. Folks at home let us know they couldn't hear us, and we were able to fix it. So first, I want to make sure that I thank the members of the committee. I want to thank the city departments. I want to thank the mayor's office. I want to thank everyone. In just these past 8 days, I've had so many conversations and been able to incorporate a lot of your all's feedback. And so tonight's hearing is in direct response to feedback that we've gotten from community, that we've gotten from providers, that we've gotten from other departments in the city, that I've gotten from you all. And so one of the things that many of you all have asked me about is this continuum of care. What is that? What is their mission? Who is it comprised of? Does it include unhoused providers from all across the city? And you've asked for a more holistic picture of what is going on with the unhoused issue and the service providers that are available today. I don't want to speak on behalf of folks, and I want to make sure that the same conversations I've been able to have for months with many of these different individuals, that we're able to have it here publicly. So we're going to start with a presentation from the continuum of care, and then after the presentation, we will, if Madam Chair is okay with it, we will let members of the committee ask whatever questions they may have.
All right. Thank you, Alderwoman Saunier and other alders on the board, everyone in person and online. My name is Anthony D'Agostino, and I am the chair of the St. Louis Continuum of Care, the board, and this is...
Hi, everyone, and everyone in the audience. I'm Cynthia Duffy. I am the executive director of Gateway Housing First. We provide permanent supported housing solutions to formerly unhoused people with disabilities who are extremely low income and their families across St. Louis City and County. We have 2 continuum funded programs in the city and 2 in the county. Our housing units are scattered about 50-50 across both counties.
Thank you. So we were asked to come and tell you a little bit about, I'm just going to be honest with you, in my opinion, an incredibly more complicated group than it probably should be. But specifically to this issue, the St. Louis COC just had a statement that they applaud the recent attention to the rights of people experiencing homelessness, and that we have always been promoting 5 major policy solutions, and we summarize those as focusing on human rights of everyone, increasing emergency shelter options, which are needed, and we'll get into why, providing just alternatives for those waiting for access to shelter or housing, and creating an array of permanent affordable housing, which is really important, and then properly resourcing accessible, relevant, responsive support services. So we are just very happy that this conversation is occurring and that we are discussing this issue of some of the most vulnerable people in the community right now. And I'm going to let Cynthia tell you a little bit more about the structure of what a continuum of care actually is, a little bit about our mission.
So most of you probably know this, but for those who don't, a continuum of care is required by HUD. It's mandated by HUD for all communities that receive continuum of care funding to respond to homelessness. It is essentially a group that organizes because they're interested in resolving homelessness in their community. We strategize and plan and coordinate a comprehensive approach to providing housing and services for people in danger of becoming homeless or those experiencing homeless. And we do this on behalf of a specific geographic area that is funded by HUD. So in this case, we're doing it on behalf of the city of St. Louis. There's also a continuum for St. Louis County, for St. Charles, Lincoln, and Warren, the balance of state, and in many ways, we all collaborate together to approach this from a regional perspective. We have to follow the HUD mandates, and so of course we do that, and then we are also constantly looking at local community needs and priorities and coordinating a system that is responsive to those needs. From the HUD point of perspective, we have to collect and analyze needs and outcomes data, both on the systems-wide level, the individual level, and the program level, determine the most effective uses of our HUD's funds via the programs that HUD is funding, and to coordinate the local annual HUD competition for funding and make sure that what we are applying for to HUD, what we're asking for on behalf of a community via a number of programs provided by a number of partners, represents what we need most in our community and what is absolutely providing the best outcomes. It also requires that we encourage and support coordination of housing service providers, government agencies, businesses, private individuals, private funders, to make sure that we're leveraging and maximizing the diverse funding and resources we have and bringing all the talents to bear that are required to deal with this very complicated issue. And then it also requires that we develop and educate a strategic plan for our community that reduces the impacts of homelessness and housing instability on those experiencing it. And we do it for those who are experiencing it or have experienced it, but on behalf of the entire community, because when everyone is housed, we're all healthier and happier. The City of St. Louis Continuum of Care has its own mission and mission statement, and that is that the continuum engages, aligns, and unites the community to end homelessness and to ensure safe and supported housing for everyone. And our vision is that the COC leads effective partnerships that prevent and end homelessness so immediate resources are available to those who need them and everyone has a place to call home.
Thank you. And we were asked to list, and this is the list of all active voting members. As we said, the Continuum of Care is a membership agency, an organization mandated by HUD. So membership is open to anyone aligning with our mission and wanting to help end homelessness and wanting to help work towards that mission, and then also help with sheltering and housing for our unhoused neighbors. And you can see here we have over 70 active voting members from across the city. Obviously, I'm not going to name all of them, but we have people from north, south, east, and west of the geographical area of the city. And just quickly what we do, I'm going to let Cynthia talk about this a little bit more, but there's a diagram on the right side that kind of shows a little bit. I think there's a lot of ones you can look out there, but this simplifies it a little bit, even though it's a very complex issue dealing with all the situation around homelessness. But it should have all the resources involved to actually get someone from being unsheltered outside in an uninhabitable place through the outreach, the coordinated entry system, and the process to go into a very short-term shelter if there's not enough housing, but eventually get to the bottom where they are being in a housing program. So it says transitional housing, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing. That's all types of housing. But as people probably know, we don't have enough housing. So therefore, we have nowhere where we can actually move people who are on the streets into that housing. So we need to create more affordable housing stock. And while we're doing that, and even after we do that, there are still situations where we need an emergency shelter situation, almost like an ER, to help people who are in crisis and in need while we're getting them into housing. And then there's more here that I'm going to let Cynthia talk about with HUD.
So HUD, in the annual competition, evaluates what we have been doing and what we plan to do with our HUD money. And I think and they score us, and the higher performing communities get more money. And so we're constantly thinking all year long, what can we do to improve our system? How can we respond to HUD's priorities and our local priorities better? Because ultimately, it ensures that we maintain the funding level we have and then increase funding when possible. And, again, the better we do it, the better the outcomes, the happier HUD is, and the more money they give us. But also, there are specific things that they're looking for us to do and that they'll give us points for, and therefore more money for. They fund communities at higher levels who show through their continuum efforts that they are working for policy change that decriminalizes homelessness. And when you're successful, they're even more responsive in a positive way. And they also are, obviously looking for us to drive down the length of time homeless and ensure that we are providing sufficient resources for outreach, especially homeless street outreach, to those who are most disconnected from and disenfranchised from the system, so we can get them into housing more quickly, keep them permanently housed ultimately, and improve our system-wide outcomes. We're supposed to oversee prevention. They don't give us the COC any particular resources for prevention, but they give the city emergency solution grants, and then of course the city has other opportunities to leverage other funds, public funding for prevention. But we are supposed to coordinate with folks who need those prevention funds to make sure that they don't enter into homelessness whenever possible. We're supposed to provide robust outreach that reaches out to people who are disconnected from the systems, who are outside and need supports, provide intake and assessment, and ultimately get them through a coordinated system that matches them with the housing resources and the support services they need as quickly as possible. Sometimes that's shelter along the way. Sometimes that's serving them while on the streets, and do that through the Continuum and other affordable housing programs in our community. They require us to decide how much we need in terms of transitional housing, rapid rehousing, short, medium housing solutions. They provide rental assistance to people renting from traditional landlords generally. They provide some funding for support services. So we're also, the agencies that are running those programs can provide supports to help people get stabilized and eventually be prepared to pay 100% of their rent on their own. When that doesn't go exactly as planned or people's needs are higher than initially assessed, there's also a continuum process for transferring them to a higher level of supports, which would be permanent supported housing. And then finally, we have resources for permanent supported housing, which provides intensive long-term supports and long-term rental assistance to people who are disabled and chronically homeless, and of course their families too. That's what GHF does. So we do this through data collection. We're responsible for collecting data, deciding what data points are going to be required of the funded providers, finding ways to give access to non-funded providers to the systems that we are collecting data through. There are certain mandated HUD data requirements, and then there's also data that we're collecting because we've decided as a community that it's really going to allow us to hone in on our issues and prioritize our funding in the most effective way. HUD requires that we have a coordinated entry system. We talked about that a little, having a objective way to the largest extent possible of assessing people's needs and then matching them to the housing resource that will work for them, and then pivoting to a different resource if it turns out that that wasn't the resource that they needed to stay housed. Because of course the goal and what HUD ultimately wants to see is as few people returning to homelessness as possible. We have to oversee service delivery, and that's really gathering all of the service providers that are doing this work and trying to standardize the processes across programs on some level to make sure that everybody is working in accordance with best practice, and what we have found is producing the best outcome. Every program can design certain aspects of their work in accordance with their own mission, but ultimately there's some coordination and responsibility to the larger continuum about how you're doing that. We have to oversee program performance, which means we're looking at each program individually all year long, looking at their outcomes, looking at whether they are serving our most pressing community needs at any given time, and then realigning our funding with each annual funding cycle in accordance with what we're learning about those program outcomes and the needs that they're serving in program performance. And lastly, we have advocacy that comes together to advocate for policy and change that advances a better system that reduces homelessness and ensures that we can respond to it more quickly and more humanely.
And as was mentioned earlier, we are in the city geographical area, so that's the location of the continuum of care, and that's our focus. However, we do have regional partnerships. We have a regional approach. As we all know in here, homelessness is not bound by borders or barriers. It is transient across not only state lines, but also municipal lines. So there's a list of some providers that we work with and we have continued to work with over the years. SLARCH, HMIS, there are other continuums that Cynthia already mentioned across the state that we collaborate with. City and county departments outside of the city of St. Louis in St. Louis County and other counties in St. Charles, Lincoln, and others. The Missouri Department of Behavioral Health, and then obviously the public housing authorities and health departments. And just to talk a little bit about data, these are, we have, as Cynthia said, we have data that we collect, and these are some of the most recent data points from our coordinated entry list. And I'll just go over a few that are key here that are up on the screen. And, household demographics of current households on the waiting list. So as I mentioned earlier, we don't have enough affordable housing. So if you are currently considered in the system as homeless or unhoused and you need somewhere to go, you go onto a waiting list while we try to, as quickly as possible, find and coordinate a housing solution for you. And as you can see here are some of the data points, just so you know what this looks like. Youth-headed households. So any household that is an individual or people that are 16 to 24, that's 11% of the people on the coordinated entry list. 12% families with children. 24% victims of DV, domestic violence, or trafficking. We have quite a few, 24% that are medically frail, 10% veterans, which is way higher than the actual population of veterans that serve compared to the general population. And then chronically homeless, which is the definition of someone who has been homeless for a long period of time and or has come into the homelessness system several times over a period of time. That's 40%. And then living in a place not meant for human habitation. That's about a third of the people who are on the coordinated entry list waiting for housing. And as you can see on the right side, we have a lot of people waiting for housing. We actually have, so just to go into a couple things, we have average length of time people who are homeless on the list are about 700 days that they have been homeless, according to the system. And then we also have a waiting list about 160 days overall. But if you're looking at breaking it down, for rapid rehousing, it's 235. For permanent supportive, it's 113. So a long period of time. Our goal would be to shrink that substantially. It should be very quick, immediate turnaround, not days, months, days, weeks, and months like it is now. And just shelter space. This comes up obviously when we're talking about this bill. How much shelters do we need? We are usually hovering around 90% full within our shelters. The 10% that's not full is usually because of just waiting for someone who's on a list to come in and keeping that spot while we have that. So there's always going to be some vacancy rate. It's hard not to have. And then, also just to give you the data points, we have this was last year's, 413 year-round shelter beds, according to our most updated winter outreach spreadsheet. 413 year-round beds that were identified last year. And since this year isn't over, I didn't want to put this year's numbers on, but this is the year full. And then 363 overflow beds in addition in the winter that open up because of the cold weather. And then Turnaway is a new data point that we've created. We've gotten a lot of help through COC members to get this up and running. And through the system, within the first week of being operable, it's actually only a week old. Within that first week, we've identified 34 people who were turned away because there weren't enough shelter beds at the particular shelter they were referred to or going into. And we find that since it was the first week, it's probably a very low number since we're just getting used to knowing the system. But if you have us back sometime, we can give you turnaway number on a weekly or even daily rate, and we can see actually how many people were turning away consistently. So that's a lot of data, and I want to hand this over to Cynthia again to talk a little bit more about best practices, and we can kind of tie this in. We can tie this into a little bit more about the maybe even zoning and the policy issues that we're discussing tonight.
Well, I just want to say a couple more things about the data points because I think they're important that Anthony didn't mention. Of the 12% of families with children who are unhoused, 50% of them right now are unsheltered also. So that's a really significant number of kids sleeping on the streets just in the city of St. Louis alone. 30% living in places not meant for human habitation. That's a significant number too. Obviously, that is demonstrative of the lack of shelter options that are really working for some people. Of course, there's some people who are never going to want to go to shelter, and that should be their right. But a lot of people can't access a shelter that actually works for them. Just like one-size-fits-all housing doesn't work, one-size-fits-all shelter doesn't work. And some people have needs and disability circumstances that are family circumstances that have to be responded to that our current shelter system can't at the rate we need them. I also want to point out that these coordinated entry numbers are only those people who are actually engaged in the system now, who are actually actively working with a continuum of care to get a housing slot or get a shelter bed. The presumption is we have about twice as many unhoused people who aren't engaged with the system at any given time. And I think that's reflective in the average length of time homeless. People are reporting that are proving up that they've been homeless for 700 days before they get housed. But once they engage with the system, it takes about 160 days to actually move them to a housing referral. So if we can engage with people, they can move to housing much more quickly. If we're disconnected from them, we can't. And the policies around closing encampments over and over or having high shelter standards people can't meet in terms of whether they can access them, whether they can stay there, is interrupting our ability to serve them in really profound ways that are keeping people homeless for hundreds of days longer than they necessarily need to be. And then on the rapid rehousing, permanent supported housing front, where it's taking about 235 days to move somebody from referral to housing under rapid rehousing programs. So that's not like how long they're homeless. It's like once they get a referral for rapid rehousing, once they have a case manager that's helping them, they have the rental assistance that is available, now they have to go out into the marketplace and find a landlord that'll rent to them based on their household circumstances, what they need, what they want, and they have assistance to do it, but still it's taking over 200 days because we don't have enough housing. With permanent supported housing, the numbers are a little lower. In part, that's because we have site-based programs, so the numbers being driven down by the programs who can move somebody in within days of the referral. But when relying on the marketplace, traditional landlords, it's closer to 200 days. And those days are rising because rents are exceeding the fair market rent that HUD will pay. So people are not only struggling to find a landlord that'll rent to them, but they're struggling to find a unit that rents for the amount that the subsidy will pay. So obviously we need more housing. So the best practices. A lot of what these bills are proposing around opening up access to shelter, providing just opportunities for alternatives to sheltering, the encampment proposals, ultimately having enough shelter and housing that is responsive to the needs of the people are all grounded in best practices that produce results. They're person-centered. We're actually listening to people. We're responding to their needs as they present them as in their own words and based on their own circumstances. We're providing critical time intervention in that we're responding to people's crisis needs quickly and intensely, and then phasing off services eventually so we can provide those critical services to somebody else. But when we're playing this game where we're running around town looking for people, we're not effectively providing person-centered services, nor are we responding critically in that moment of time when we can actually have a big impact to those crisis needs, which puts people back. Of course, we have to be trauma-informed in our care. That's why we have to provide an array of solutions that work for people. A lot of people's decisions about where they're going to shelter, whether inside or outside, what kind of shelter they need is, and permanent housing as well, is in response to the traumas that they've experienced while homeless. If we can't respond to those traumas with services that are healing and physical plants, housing, and shelter that is also healing, then those traumas persist, and often people return to homelessness. We have to apply a harm reduction approach. This is a requirement of HUD. We have to do everything we can to reduce the harm of poverty, reduce the harm of homelessness by responding properly and quickly, and that includes responding to people's substance use disorders in ways that are actually life-saving. And then finally, we have to be housing first, and that means that we're doing everything we can to put people quickly into housing that works for them, without requiring enrollment in services, engagement in any particular treatment option. The housing come first, and you work on everything else from there once people are more stable. Did you want to say anything about the best practices?
I just on a couple things, this is topical because obviously it's cold out today and it's been cold out this week. And winter is coming, and that always is the focus of service providers. And I just want to say that we currently have had, working with DHS, there's an RFP out for winter beds, more winter beds, more winter spaces for our unhoused neighbors to get in and off the streets. And that RFP didn't have enough responses from service providers. And so it had to be RFP'd out again. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to find service providers able to provide services. And this is my opinion, I guess, but I think most service providers I talk to echo this. It's really difficult to provide services because of all the restrictions in our city. The city has brought up and put up so many obstacles and roadblocks that it is difficult to operate as a service provider, and the lack of resources also makes it difficult as well. So we have a dwindling service provider population, and so I think that is something that obviously dealing with zoning and whatever comes out of this, it would be a very big help to the service providers who are working really hard to do this work, to be able to get something up and going in an expedited fashion. And it's not just for emergency sheltering, we're talking about sheltering, but it's also for housing. Housing, we need to start breaking down some of the roadblocks in order to get more affordable housing, not just for people who are considered quote unquote homeless, but for anybody who doesn't have the funding to be able to afford adequate, safe housing. So that was just a connection there. Did you have anything else?
I just want to point out that also that's this pattern that we've been in for the last several years around shelter, being really deprived of shelter that is needed year-round, and being extremely deprived in the winter is dangerous to so many people's lives, but it's also preventing the progress that we need generally. It's very difficult to prop up a 90-day operation on the fly. It's more expensive for the providers, and all the resources aren't coming from the government. So you have to fundraise and do incredible amounts of volunteer work, both and rely on so many different resources, where if we would just ensure that we had enough shelter all the time, we could move people to housing more quickly, and we could avoid this trauma that everyone is experiencing, both from the provider point of view and the people who need it every single winter. And then I just want to also point out that it takes a long time to build housing. We're a housing developer. It can take 3, 4, 5 years for us to prop up a new housing project, and especially one that offers the really accommodating, high level of supports that some people need, those who have been outside the longest, those who have the most serious health conditions, and have experienced the most profound traumas, who are extremely low income. We are thousands of units short in the city of St. Louis. We cannot rely on housing alone to solve this problem today. We have to do something in the interim, and we have to change policy around how we're allocating our affordable housing resources in this community so more of those resources go to extremely low-income households. I'm sure you guys have looked at some of the reports and studies that the city has done over the last few years that really demonstrate the limited amount of affordable housing resources, public funding that was going to specifically extremely low-income households, and almost none was going to permanent supported housing. And, here we are. In 2020, according to the city's own study, 30% of all city households couldn't afford a rent of over $625. Rents are up $200 for one-bedroom apartment from that time. By early next year, it will cost more than 100% of someone's Social Security disability entitlement benefit of about $900 to rent a one-bedroom apartment in St. Louis. Obviously, people are not going to stay stably housed. We have to provide more options that are income-based for extremely low-income households. And we can't just close our eyes and let people be outside and pretend like this isn't happening until we get enough housing propped up. Because what happens when we do that is people get sicker, they need more supports long-term, they have a harder time turning their lives around once they have the opportunity to get into housing, and a lot of people die. And there's just so many evidence-based ways of addressing these issues. There are providers that want to do it. Leadership has to step up with the policies, changes that are needed to make it happen, and then ultimately the resources that are required to carry it out. But I really appreciate all of your time today and all the attention to these matters.
Okay, we'll see if any of the committee people have questions. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you so much to both of you for coming today and for giving us that presentation. It is already 6:51 and we have many people who want to speak, so I know how to get in touch with both of you, and if I have questions, I'll reach out. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Alderman Browning.
I want to echo my colleague's sentiment. Thank you for being here. Thank you for speaking to this issue. Anthony, I had a great conversation with you yesterday about this subject, and I really just appreciate the attention being brought to this and really the breakdown that you provided. It was very thorough, and I think helps us all proceed with more education about this. So appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much. All right.
Okay, I know we're getting later into the evening. The other part of this legislation that has gotten a lot of conversation is the encampments, the intentional encampments. And so there is one more presentation from who's going to come up shortly. We've had an intentional encampment in the city of St. Louis before. It was for a very brief period of time, but I reached out and said, could you come and educate us and tell us how that went? Could you give us some information about how much that cost? What were the experiences? What were the metrics of success? Because obviously that is going to be important. The work that we've already done is going to set the tone for the work moving forward, and it will give us some insight into what needs to be a part of these processes as we move forward. So I will have her come up now and thank her for coming here, and I will let you kind of introduce yourself. I know most of my colleagues have gotten a chance to meet you already.
Hi, good evening. My name's Amanda.
Sorry, we're going to swear you in.
Oh.
Yes.
Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may proceed.
Perfect. Good evening. My name is Amanda Lawmeyer, St. Patrick Center, and Alderwoman Saunier asked me to come and speak about our experience running an intentional encampment a few years ago here in St. Louis. So wanted to share a little bit about that with you. And let's get this going. Slideshow. There we go. Here we go. So before I went into that, I just wanted to give you a background on what Patrick Center is and sort of the services that we provide, what we do. You just heard my colleagues from the COC, which we're a member of the COC, the Continuum Care, on all the different services that are available through that. And at St. Patrick Center, we provide support for 4,400 people each year. It's through a variety of different programs that include permanent supportive housing programs, rapid rehousing programs, and sheltering. We do 2 separate shelters, one for 30 women, one for 25 adults. So we are just one piece of the shelter work that is happening all across the region, and certainly not making a tremendous impact, but every little bit helps. And we know every day our shelters are full and very, very rare to find openings. There's a little bit of information about St. Patrick Center and the work we do through Catholic Charities in the Archdiocese. These are some numbers, and I know we're short on time, so I'll just briefly go through some of those so we can get to the Camp Cole information. But it gives you an idea of the people that we serve, put some faces to the individuals that are coming, not just to St. Patrick Center, to many service providers. These are people who are working. These are individuals that are oftentimes veterans that have served our country, families, parents, just people that really need to find better support to get the housing that they need. Much of the work that we do and a lot of the service providers out there is focused on that rapid rehousing and supportive housing. Without the support of St. Patrick Center, 518 households would have faced eviction. There's work like this happening across the region, but this is some of the most important work that I think we do. Also, the 458 households finding new housing. So without finding housing, where would those 458 households be? This is why I think, as my colleagues just said, there's such an importance and such a need for more affordable housing in our community. Yes, we need more shelter space, but they kind of go hand in hand. We need both to be able to really make an impact. So Camp Cole was a project that we started in August of 2021. It was the city's first intentional encampment. You can see the photo on the screen there. This was done in a warehouse that was sort of an open air style warehouse. It was for 40 residents. Each resident received their own new to them tent. You can see they each had their own little station, a chair, place to store their items. It was 24/7 staffed. We had security as well, and it actually was started because of the unsafe conditions that were happening in Interco Plaza, which was, if you remember the summer of 2021, that was a really difficult situation, created a lot of safety and security issues for the area. So we were able to open that up. You'll see some more pictures here. This provided a low barrier, safe space for individuals to go. So it operated 24/7. There was sort of a lounge area, access to TV, Wi-Fi. There was restrooms there on site through a porta potty that we had serviced. Anyone that needed access to laundry, lunch, or showers, they could do that at St. Patrick Center because we were about 2 blocks away. There was also, at the time, a shower trailer service that the city was operating, and we coordinated with them on the schedule to do that as well, to have that available. And then we provided dinner and breakfast to the residents there. It was a great way to get services to people in a low barrier way. So low barrier is allowing folks to come in that oftentimes maybe have been banned from shelters, that may not be ready for a traditional shelter setting. There's very less rules. So there are rules in a low barrier environment, but there's not going to be a curfew. It takes a lot to maybe not make it accessible for somebody. How did we measure success? So we were open for only 90 days. It's so difficult to say, here's these great outcomes, here's these great numbers, but we did provide a safe and secure environment. Many of the residents that were there were quoted in lots of media that they felt safe for the first time ever. They were able to actually connect with a case manager because they had that one-on-one time. They could reach different service providers. We had a wealth of partners come in and provide different types of services during the day so that we could connect people to whatever service they might need, whether that was housing or health service. We found 2 veterans just within a couple of weeks of moving in that were able to find housing right away. We were able to help clients get housing vouchers, and during their stay, they had access to a wealth of different programs and services that were happening. Clothing, food, many different things. Especially being close to St. Patrick's Center, we can access our entire building of services, which was a huge benefit to this program. We also followed the best practices of intentional encampments that are happening successfully across the country in other cities, specifically Denver, who I think you'll be hearing from in the coming weeks on their experience of running encampments. This was 100% privately funded, so without the Archdiocese, Starwood Properties, and another private donor, we would not be able to have sustained this, including the warehouse that was donated by Starwood Properties. So it was a great opportunity to show St. Louis what can be done. Unfortunately, though, we exhausted all of the funding and we had to close Camp Cole in November. We also knew long-term that warehouse would not suffice for the winter. It was open air and we weren't going to be able to heat it safely, once January and February came. So we did at the end of the 90 days, we had about 15 people left, and we did continue to serve them through partnering with a motel and make sure that they did find housing. So we considered it a success, although it was a small, short project. It gave everyone a really good idea of what's needed to run an encampment. And what we feel is needed is 24/7 security. That's what we did. We had 2 program assistants per shift, program manager, and 1 to 2 case managers during the day. You've also got to connect with a lot of resources to make sure you have the right type of programs coming in and providing the support, meals, restrooms, showers. Camp Cole cost us on average about $57,000 per month. It's very expensive. Just a minute ago, you heard that 90-day operations that are put together quickly are more costly. So this definitely was. I would say that that's probably a pretty accurate cost, though, of all of the services that we had there, considering you want to make sure you have staff that's trained, that can provide that professional environment, and that is providing those services that these clients need. We had low barrier, which I mentioned before, which means there was no alcohol or drugs on site, no violence or harm to others, and then otherwise that was really the only restrictions to coming in. Of course, we would allow people to come and go as they needed, and then be able to access services 24/7. The other program I wanted to mention, which is very similarly related, is Grace House, which is our safe haven emergency shelter. It opened this January. It's in Old North St. Louis. Very similar to Camp Cole, is it's a low barrier shelter. So that means it invites people to come in with those 3 kind of main rules, and then allows them to reach services when they'd like to. It's really a great environment for someone, especially we're talking so often about the encampments. These are individuals that, have lived outside for many, many years. Transitioning into a traditional shelter can be very difficult. So this provides that alternative environment. It's very, very similar to an intentional encampment. So Grace House, you see there, we just opened this in January. It's funded 100% through ARPA dollars through the city of St. Louis. We average that cost is about $83,000 to $90,000 a month. Those costs are a little bit higher because you can tell it's a building. So we've got the rent and the utilities and things that go along with that. And I put some numbers up on the screen on some of the results we've had for that. By doing this type of work and working with clients that maybe are shunned away from traditional shelter or not interested in that, we're really able to connect with people at a different level and provide them with the support that they need. And you can see that we are getting people successfully into housing through doing this, but as you heard earlier, the wait time and the access is also a challenge for anyone that's through these programs. So that is all I have. I ran through that quickly because I know we were on a time limit. So happy to answer questions, share more information later, whatever you guys need.
Okay, I definitely would like more information. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you so much for coming today. I will definitely reach out to you with more questions. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right.
Alderman Browning.
Yes, in an attempt to get to public input, I will follow up with you later.
Okay, sounds good.
I just have a quick question just for people that's watching and for the people that's in the room. With the approximately 57K per month at Camp Cole, how many people did they serve?
We served 40 people,
Okay. And the Safe Haven,
25.
20.
So the Safe Haven, we serve 25 people each night. Since January, the first 9 months we served 126 people because as people transition out, we can take on new. So,
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
you're welcome. All right. Thank you.
Okay. I want to make sure I thank those folks again for giving their presentations. I'm going to try to be quick as well, but I know that there's some things that came up specifically in committee last time and came up in between time. So I just want to retouch some things before we dive into public comment. Okay, so Board Bill 126 is really supposed to address what continuing care folks talked about being those short-term, immediate options. Some things that I'm going to talk to you all tonight, because I know you don't have a committee substitute or proposed changes. While I've been talking to colleagues and alders, there's some things for Board Bill 127 and Board Bill 128 that have been proposed to be adjusted that I think are great changes. So we're actually going to try to get some of those suggested changes sent back to the Planning Commission. But in the meantime, I'm hoping to get as many meetings and conversations with other alders so that every single idea that comes up can be addressed. Some of the things, again, that Board Bill 126 does that's immediate is establish an unsheltered neighbors task force. A lot of what has come up from providers, from political officials, from the city is just the importance of making sure we have a group of people who have the expertise and the knowledge to know how do you ensure that a shelter can open and operate without being a detriment to the folks that are taking shelter in it or being a detriment to community around it. And so the Unhoused Neighbors Task Force consists of some folks, and I won't get too much into it because there's a slide that describes that, so we'll save that for there. And then the next thing it does is it starts to set a standard of humane protocols for when we have to close unauthorized encampments or decommission encampments in both emergency and non-emergency situations. Again, much of those practices were practices that have happened historically or were practices that the Department of Human Services suggested, this is kind of our informal process, so this is what could be helpful to be put into writing. And then the last thing that it does is it would establish those safe camping areas for folks who, for various reasons, won't have access to shelter already, but making sure that, in the spaces there and the folks that can serve, there is those hygiene and sanitation services, 24/7 security and mental health. And then 127 and 128 are about the long-term solution. They are about expanding shelter capacity. They are about addressing and transforming a failing system that hasn't opened up a shelter in 15 years. And so to ease the burden on that process and to make it to be something that can work, and then also to encourage the creation of smaller cities that can be scattered throughout the city. But many of my colleagues have spoken, particularly Northside others who I've gotten to speaking to, have talked about the fact that majority of the shelters are concentrated either in the north side of the city or in downtown of the city. And so how do we have policies and processes that help us to deconcentrate poverty by spreading those resources all around our city? And so those are a part of the goals of that. I won't go through the last slide. We got that in the last hearing, but that was, again, that map that President Green gave to kind of talk about her holistic look and her holistic vision for all the things to do to housing. And so this next slide is going to talk about some of the proposed changes to Board Bill 126. Again, I will say we are still changing the legislation. We are still in conversation. We are still in this process. So anything that you all want to see that's not here, please feel free to bring to me. But also, hopefully, you will see some of what you've given to me in conversation incorporated in here. One of the things that came up is just a desire to kind of make the legislation cleaner and smoother and more organized. So I went in and defined a little bit more what is the whereas section. The committee substitute that I plan to bring in front of you, the only thing that we will be repealing is the intentional encampment ban. And so I know that the previous version had some repeals of the loitering and aggressive panhandling and things like that. Alderman Browning uplifted those things as some concerns. And so we've taken all of that out and have just left the repeal of the encampment, since the most important point of this bill is to help as many people as we can have an immediate solution and be able to get connected to permanent housing. We redefined some definitions that alders asked questions about, some not from this body, some from our broader body, but that just had questions about just the way that things were defined. So clearing that up. Again, making sure we're as clearly as possible differentiation between the process for closing all unauthorized encampments for non-emergency reasons and emergency reasons, and then that provision of safe camping areas, a severity clause, an emergency clause. And then the other thing that I would note that was mentioned before is there was an interactions with law enforcement section in the previous bill that is proposed to be completely strucken out, so that we can just leave those best practices up to our public safety department. They will be at the table should this legislation pass, and so making sure that they're able to kind of work with the encampment area and the shelter providers to make sure that they have security plans that are up to date, but that is not tying their hands or preventing them from doing what they need to do to ensure that all of us are safe. Again, this just repeats what I said, that those other things will not be repealed. The only thing that will be repealed would be the bans on the intentional encampments. Some clarity of definitions. I won't go into all of these. You all will just get a copy of this and be able to read, but these were things that have come up that I've worked with some departments to just clarify the language. I do want to talk about the Unsheltered Neighbors Task Force, because I know a lot of alders has just expressed a concern. You know, the Conditional Use Board, is that a body that has experience in shelters and operating these facilities? Is that a body that has the expertise to make sure that we are properly vetting these facilities? And so I think the honest answer to that is no. And so how do we address that? And so the Unsheltered Neighbors Task Force would be led by the the director of the Department of Human Services, but then it will also include 2 representatives from the City of Continuum of Care, a healthcare professional, a behavioral health professional, a public safety professional, and they would all form a committee that would do 2 things, and I will just keep going to get into that. But one of the things that they will be tasked with, number one, the moment that the city gives notice to decommission an intentional encampment, this task force would activate. Why? I think that we have to have collaboration and we have to have communication with experts, but we also have to make sure that the director of Department of Human Services is able to be in leadership and is able to call on folks that are a part of these larger spectrums, so that we're not just relying on us or operating in isolation. So as soon as the city would give notice to begin the 30-day notice to decommission encampment, this task force would activate and they would begin to help out with the placement of services and connection of resources. The other thing that this committee would be tasked to do is they would make the recommendations to the Conditional Use Board. So when you would apply for a shelter right now, if you apply for a shelter, because shelter is not allowed in any zoning area that we have in the city of St. Louis, and I'll repeat that, shelters are not allowed in any zoning area in the city of St. Louis. As soon as you apply, you get denied and you go to the Board of Adjustment. In the new proposed process, you would apply and you would start to interact with this board, who would make sure that your operational plan is up to date, your security plan is up to date, and some of those other things that are needed to make sure that all of us can operate as a community in a way would work. And then this board will operate with a majority vote rule as far as recommendations and steps to be taken. It clearly defines, again, just a process for closing unauthorized encampments on a non-emergency reason. Most of this has not changed, except for the Unhoused Neighbors Task Force is more specifically named. Again, this has come from conversations with the Department of Human Services and just kind of making it very clear so that if this legislation passes, those processes are walked out. But most of this is similar to what was already in the legislation, except that it just makes sure that this group is named. But again, that would be 30-day notice. And then the Unhoused Neighbors Task Force would activate. They would coordinate the efforts to connect services. The city would be giving bags and tags to belongings, which is something that is already a common practice. We're just naming it. And then they will also hold them for 90 days, which again is already a common practice. We're just naming it in here. And then if the protocol is followed and people in the unauthorized encampment are still unable to leave, at that point is when Metropolitan Police officers or security mechanisms would help to be available to transport them to an adequate living spaces, depending on what's available. I know that this was also a lot of question from you all, and so just some clarity after some communication with some legal entities and some other things about what it would look like, the provision of safe camping areas, making sure that that was just one place. This is a very broad, big uptaking that is not going to happen overnight, and you're not going to start with 5 right away. So just the idea is that you would start with 1. Obviously, we have to comply with that state statute and making sure that it is not on state land and that is on city area. There's another slide to clarify that. But then these things that are named where we provide 24/7 security, we have a toilet, we have a hand washing station, we have a shower, waste management services. These are all things that were named within that state statute that had to be provided. And then the other thing that come up from some of our other colleagues, not on this committee in general, but it's just wanting a clarification of the data collection so that we're continuing to get a clear idea of who composes of our unhoused population and how long they're doing, putting off of the data that the continuum of care has, but making sure that we would be collecting that data in this safe camping area as well. This is the state statute, and so I just put it right on the slide, and it clearly says, no person shall be permitted to use state-owned lands for unauthorized sleeping, camping, or the construction of long-term shelters. And then any violation of this shall be issued a warning. And so just kind of mapping out exactly what that says and clarifying for you all that everything that is in this bill has been given the green light of being completely legally feasible. And some of the things in the legislation that we will do, though, to help make it clearer that this is legally feasible is clearly differentiation between state-owned land and municipal property, to be clear that we don't intend on doing that, and clearly defining that these cannot exist on state-owned land, but then also acknowledging that the state also gives us guidance of the established of authorized camping and sleeping areas, depending on the location and shelter status. And so just to make sure that we are staying compliant with the state's laws so that we are not at risk of losing any funding or eligible for as much additional funding as may be needed. This is some information about the process for closing unauthorized encampments in emergency situations. Again, not much is different from what was in the initial version, except for we have clearly defined the role of the Unhoused Neighbors Task Force in the situation, and also said, 72 hours notice is the desire of what is the case, but sometimes that's not possible because of natural disasters. If something violent were to happen, we need to make sure that the still able to respond in the moment. So making sure that we have this emergency clause in there, or exigent clause in there to help that be doable. Okay, and then the proposed changes to Board Bill 127 and 128, which again, I'm hoping this can be collaborative and you all can give me your feedback. But the original version of the bill authorizes shelter beds that are 8 beds or less to open up right to permit. It's been expressed to me from some of my colleagues, I would prefer for every shelter to be vetted. And I think that's like a very fair and valid point. The original thinking of the Planning and Zoning Commission was that every other entity within a mixed-use district, which is about 5% of the city, is right to permit. So let's give shelters the same thing. But we're going to take this back through the process and ask for everyone to be on a conditional use hearing so that no shelters opening up right away. And then also the other thing that we would change is that recommendation piece, because again, the conditional use board, even though the Director of Human Services serves on the conditional use board, making sure that the Unhoused Neighbors Task Force, that is the group of experts, that they are the ones making the recommendation to the conditional use board. And then at that point, they will proceed with their giving the notice to the community, having their hearings in that usual process. We can't create a process from scratch, all new and brand new. And so I've just been working to figure out what can we do with the processes in place to address the concerns that have come. But again, anything that is doable and that is doable in the foreseeable future that you all have concerns about still, I'm happy to shop that back through, and really am asking for you all's comments and feedback on that, because I don't want the Zoning and Planning Commission are just asking that we can all of our ask and all our changes together at one time so that we don't end up having 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 more planning commission changes. Okay, and I think that completes my portion, so I can take questions from any of you all, or we can go to public comment.
I think we'll move on to public comment.
Okay.
Okay, and so everybody that's signed up, we're gonna do it one time to try to save on time. If you can raise your right hand, the clerk will swear you all in, and then she will call you by name.
Do you
Come up and speak.
or swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you? Thank you. I'll have, I think this is Donna Dunning. Juana Dunning. Would you
Thank you,
please
and-
say which board bill are you speaking on? Okay, thank you.
All right. Hello, how you doing, everybody? All right, can you hear me? All right, how you doing? Okay, my name is Dewana Dunning, by the way. Oh, right here. Sorry, can you hear me now? Okay, perfect. Okay, my name is Dewana Dunning, and I am a nursing home worker. I'm a shop steward, and I represent over 80 people at my facility. I am, I'm sorry. I am supportive of Bill 126, 127, and 128. Right now, the higher price for rent, gas, groceries, and utilities are creating a hardship for everybody. Public surveys done this summer show that 63% of Americans are unable to cover a $500 emergency expense, when 63% of our neighbors, families, friends, and congregation, co-workers, or one emergency or one missed paycheck, away from facing homelessness. It means that the entire country is in a crisis, not just in St. Louis. This bill, oh, all right. This bill, these bills, are not going to solve that crisis. There is no magic bullet. However, there are steps we can take in order to ensure the dignity and humanity of the houseless neighbors, okay? As we work together towards a housing first solution, the bill before the committee takes those steps. As a union member, I have been fighting for respect, dignity, not just for SEIU members, but for all St. Louisans. I ask to join me in the fight to create a safe establishment space for those who are homeless, and in the silence of the voices of people that can't speak for themselves, and putting an end to unreasonable substantial that have been provided for the city for opening up a new shelter for over 15 years. When I've heard of that, it saddened me a little bit because we haven't opened
Ms. Dunning,
Yes.
your time is up.
Oh, okay. Well,
Thank you.
for listening. Who's next?
I have Donna Aga in opposition. And which board bills?
Thank you.
Is it on?
Oh, yes.
It's on. All right. Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee, for this opportunity. I will try to hold this in the proper position. I'm the president of the Southampton Neighborhood Association. We have 445 active members. We're in the southwest portion of the city. If you're familiar with where Target is, we're kind of in that vicinity. We're about a square mile. I am sympathetic. I only want to talk about Board Bill 127. I am sympathetic to the limitations that Platt and Petition has placed on some of these services, I think, or the uses of property. So I looked at, I've been looking in detail at the Planning Commission, and I want to quote something that they gave as the reason for A and B districts being included. They said, A and B lower density residential districts comprise an enormous portion of zone land in our city, so that is part of the reason this resolution does propose including them in that use table. It would be more forward-looking not to eliminate nearly half of the city. And then they gave you, and it's in your packet and attachment, they showed you this map. Should look familiar. It's all yellow, but there's something you need to notice on this map. Can you find Forest Park? Bellefontaine Cemetery? Because our Title 26 says that public parks, playgrounds, and libraries are Zone A. It also says that churches are Zone A, so it's a little misleading because we have a lot of territory in our city that are parks and playgrounds and churches and libraries. So it's not totally single homes. I then went, because I'm one of these data wonks, I went over to say, okay, well, let me look in my neighborhood. What do I have? Because I'm more familiar with Southampton than I would be in other neighborhoods. And I started looking, and I have one church zoned A. The other church is zoned not applicable. I have a series of 4 family flats that were built in the 1920s that are zoned A instead of their proper zone of C. The point I'm going to make here is when you get incomplete or bad data, it's very hard to make good decisions. So I look at that data from what my perspective right now is it's incomplete. Which am I supposed to use? Am I supposed to go to, zoning has an interactive map. They show these areas green. Title 26 shows them in Zone A. And then I go to the database where you can enter your address.
I'm sorry, Miss, I got it. That's your time.
I'm done.
Thank you.
I know we have a lot. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Drew Faley.
I'll also remind everyone, especially that you can submit that written testimony, right? You can submit it and then we can still share it. Thank you so much.
Which board bill would you be speaking on?
Pretty much all of them, but mainly the 126.
Okay, thank you. You may begin.
Good evening, members of the board and distinguished guests. My name is Drew Falvey from the Central West End under Michael Browning. I'm an advocate for the unhoused and a co-founder of Lifeline Aid Group, a 501c3 that helps and serves the unhoused. As someone working closely with the unhoused, I can say that I have never seen such disregard to the unhoused by the city. I have not witnessed any type of resources or value, including funding that goes directly to the homeless. When the city removed the warming bus, it brought on many more problems that we continue to see this very day. Since the start of COVID, we have halted all rent payments and much more. Now that we are back from COVID, evictions are on the rise. Have we all stopped caring? Throwing people out onto the streets is a trending cycle that I cannot bear to see any longer, and it needs to stop now. A basic human right means that the unhoused should be able to use the bathroom safely and legally, so why not bring out accessible public restrooms that are regularly maintained by the city? There needs to be easy access to mental health and rehab programs, keeping them from drug abuse instead of incarceration. I feel helpless seeing nothing being done to help the unhoused become a part of society by the members that have control of changing the outcome. There is nothing more that I can say and nothing more that I can do other than continue to watch my clients continue to die by being out in the cold every single day. Do something or don't do nothing at all. I am watching and everyone else is too. Thank you.
Brad Sarno.
Hi, my name is Brad Sarno. I live in Webster Groves, and I'm here to speak mostly in support of Bill 126. For the past 7 years, I've worked with various homeless outreach organizations, supporting unhoused individuals in the streets, in tent encampments, and in various shelters, often in emergency pop-up shelters. The leadership of the city has made it clear by their actions over the years that their fundamental goal is to make homelessness invisible. They've actively demonstrated that improving the conditions for its growing unhoused population is not their priority. They simply want it to be unseen. So for years, declaring that it's bad for business, that it scares people away from the city. While there are many layers to the larger homelessness problem, with a spectrum ranging from immediate human need to long-term solutions, my personal focus is in the work I've mostly been involved with. We're among the boots on the ground, face-to-face, unpaid volunteers that serve this population where they are, serving their urgent needs. As the cold sets in, we're again faced with a lethal and severe crisis. Our unhoused friends deserve to be treated with real human dignity, and they need to be as safe as possible given their circumstances. The city does not have, nor does it plan to have, the capacity to shelter or help provide for this population. This is a mathematical and historical fact. Regardless of the messaging we hear from City Hall, which, to be honest, has been nothing but lies when it comes to actual shelter bed availability and the 211 emergency line usefulness. Board Bill 126 will help establish some very critical protections regarding encampments, and I stand in full support of them. The city's previous misguided and cruel evictions only scatter our unhoused into less safe spaces, into dangerous and unnecessary confrontations with law enforcement, into the visible spaces City Hall so opposes, and even sometimes death. There is a win-win built into this bill. It can provide safer encampments with some basic needs, bathrooms, washing stations, added security and safety. They can provide outreach workers a nexus point where individuals can remain in touch with larger support networks and remain part of the continuum of care. This can be done in ways that don't upset business interests of the city. It can actually support their interests. I fully understand that these business interests we need to speak to. The city business interests partnered with the City Hall, with City Hall's backing, is the gatekeeper to better, more pragmatic, more humane solutions for our unhoused citizens. These business interests cannot make homelessness disappear. Those attempts have only proven to make things perpetually worse. But they can get on board and support these very tangible improvements offered by all three of these bills. It will be to their own benefit and ultimately a win-win. Thank you, Alderman Saunier.
Thank you. Larry Rice.
I'm strongly in favor of all three of these bills because what it directly addresses is the criminalization of homelessness. When you lose your house in the city of St. Louis, you become a criminal. There's no place you can sleep after 10 o'clock at night. You can't be in the parks, out on the street. You expect the police to solve the problem, but they can't be the sociologists and psychologists to take up when the closing of Malcolm Bliss that I've seen the past 51 years, the closing of State Hospital, the destruction of affordable housing, and daily seeing through our workers that are out on the streets every day, 150 to 200 people that are sleeping outside. Many have given up on the system. They're sick and tired of calling 211. They are moved from place to place, treated like animals. And what I want us to do is to see that we're dealing with human beings. And the most discriminated group in America are the homeless. That's a new N-word in America today. Some that might oppose this will stand up and throw them all in one group and say, I don't want those kind of people in my neighborhood. Those kind of people are our brothers and sisters and neighbors and people that can't afford to be outside. I've never seen it so bad in 51 years as it is now in the city of St. Louis. We have to address this. And I certainly thank God for those of you that have exercised the political courage to stand up for the least of these, as our Savior referred to them as. Many will go to church on Sunday morning. They'll sing the hymns at Christmas about a baby in the manger, and yet they totally forget about the babies that are living in the vacant buildings right now that we see, the elderly that are out there, our veterans that are out there, and human beings that are just like us, except they've lost their home. And you lose your home in this city, you automatically become a criminal. You expect the police to take care of the problem. They can't take care of the big problems, and they're addressing these over and over and over. So this is going to help our police department. It's going to help our neighborhoods, because you keep going with your present policies and your bigotry, what you're going to find is people more and more sleeping in your backyards. You got a vacant building, they're going to bust into it because they have to have a place to go. There's one place that I work with that looks like a condominium for the homeless. There's 20 tents on the first floor and 7 or 8 on the second floor. It's growing daily. We put porta potties out there from today out of our own pockets because they are tired of going into the bushes. This is just one example. There's people all over that are hurting, and these are our fellow human beings. And God help us if we're so cold-hearted. I'd encourage you to read Luke chapter 6. The rich man, where did he go? And poor Lazarus. We're treating the homeless in our city worse than the rich man treated Lazarus. We're all going to have a day of destiny. I want to encourage you to ask yourself what you're living for. If it's for money, God help you. If you're possessed by your possessions, I've never seen a funeral hearse, that has a U-Haul trailer behind it. So let's get our priorities straight, and let's start thinking about the people of the city of St. Louis. This is a great bill. It takes the first step in decriminalizing the whole issue of homelessness. Thank you.
Emily Hinckley.
Hi, my name is Amelia Hinckley. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a resident of the 9th Ward, and I'm here testifying in support of all of the bills. I had a speech and then I threw it out the window because these presentations covered a lot of the data. But to what the last gentleman spoke to, these are human beings we're talking about. Like, these are people who were sleeping in front of the people's house and then were booted and are now down the street because all we want to do is push this problem away and pretend we don't see it. That's how we're taught to treat this issue growing up, is just look away, don't talk to them, don't think about them. But those people exist. Those people aren't going anywhere. And as we've proven for years and years and years, we haven't dealt with this issue. And that's what we're trying to do right now, right? In just small ways. And I know that there's been a lot of fear mongering around things like public urination and all of that, which, first of all, where are they supposed to go to the bathroom, right? When no business will let them in, when there's spaces for them to actually use the bathroom. And instead of giving into that fear mongering, you all could be leaders in your community, help humanize them, to go to your neighbors and say, hey, we can take care of our people because they're not going away unless they die, which they will continue to do if you do not take action. Because it was 27 degrees this morning and it's only November 1st. We have an entire winter to get through, and there are people that will die. We need more shelter space, we need more housing, and we have not done anything about it, and now is the time to act. Right now, our petition process, as we discussed, is clearly broken. We have a whole committee on cutting red tape, which several of you are on, for businesses and entrepreneurs. Why are we not cutting the red tape for meeting people's basic needs, for meeting human rights? Why is that not a priority? We're only allowing registered voters to have a say in this petition process right now. Do you know how much disenfranchisement exists in this country, right? There's a lot of people who can't even have a say in supporting their neighbors the way that this process currently works. So you all have a choice. The choice is action, or the choice is letting people continue to live on the streets, letting their blood be on your hands. That's your choice. We can't wait another year. We can't wait another month. We can't wait another week. We have to do something today. And I have seen volunteers move heaven and earth to make that happen, to run pop-up shelters, to do street outreach year after year after year. We do not have nearly the power that you all have. We do not have the $1.2 million in ARPA funding for intentional encampments that you all have to give out. So do something, or every death that comes will be your responsibility.
Malik Lindell. Malik Lindell. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Malik Lindell. I live in the 8th Ward. I'm going to pull up my speech because this is a pretty personal story. So in the year 2020, the same year in which COVID spread throughout the US, I became housing insecure. I was disowned by my immediate family due to differences in religious beliefs. And I had to quickly figure out a new housing situation immediately. So I was forced to basically walk 8 miles to attain housing. I was walking to the university. Fortunately, I was a student at the time. So I had to find a place to stay, coordinate that with the folks at the university because it was during winter break. It was cold outside. And I don't think that people should have to go through that kind of situation. Unfortunately, I had to think about, where am I going to live? What will I do after I graduate? And fortunately, I was able to stay on campus. But even after graduation, I had to stay on campus an extra period of time. I still have debt from that, actually. And it was just a very troubling time for me. And I know other people who've gone through similar things, whether they've had issues because of their religious affiliation or because of their LGBTQ status, regarding their housing situation and their security. So I really urge you all to really support these bills, every single bill, because this is going to be better than no action, right? So I really urge you all to affirm that housing is a human right, not only through these bills, but keep working on affirming that human right, because it's really important to have housing. You know, I know a lot of negative stigma exists about people who are unhoused, but like there's people who are just like me, you know, who are just trying to live life, you know, trying to live their best life out here, you know, and make change and connect with cool people. And you can't do that and be a great asset to the community if you're barely invested in yourself. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening.
Emmett McKenna.
Hello, Emmett. My name's Emmett, and I use he, him pronouns. I live in the 9th Ward. The unhoused are the city's most vulnerable population. We've neglected them for years. Winter's coming up, and we must stop looking away and pretending this problem doesn't exist. Our shelters are constantly full. The unhoused have nowhere to go. We have too many unnecessary legal obstacles to open new shelters that are needed to take care of the unhoused. We must make it easier to provide shelter for the unhoused. In addition, we have $1.25 million in ARPA funding for encampments that will go to waste if we do not use it. Clearing these encampments does nothing to fix the problem, but is expensive and a waste of our resources. Alderman Browning, respectfully, I supported you and voted for you because I believe in your progressive vision for the city. I hope you agree that we need to put this money to good use, make it easier to build shelters, and show compassion for the unhoused instead of wasting resources and constantly harassing the unhoused without providing them any support. Thank you.
Curtis Walker. Kathleen Dunn.
Hello, my name is Kathleen Dunn. I live in Michael Browning's ward. Alderman Browning's ward. And I also am the director and founder of Red Bike Outreach, a charity that serves lunch and supplies essential survival equipment to people who are living near South, near North, and downtown as well. I have several members of my team here, and I think we can all attest, everybody here has been doing this work for over a year. We can all attest that the situation is becoming increasingly dire. We are feeding more and more people every week, and that the people are becoming concentrated in certain areas, which creates an adverse impact and burden on both public safety in those areas and in the safety of the people we serve. I want to say that Camp Cole, I thought we served lunch there. I thought it was a considerable success. We have several measures by which we can kind of evaluate how safe a place is for people. One of them is how many women are there, which indicates that they feel safe. And also how some of the people we've served for years who are particularly vulnerable due to cognitive limitations, due to mental illness, are they there and are they comfortable? So I think I am speaking in support of 126 because I do think we need planned places for people to go. I'm not saying a bunch of tents are perfect, but I am saying that we all know the need is immediate and the need is critical. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the name of the organization for me? Yeah. I want to make sure I wrote it down right.
Red Bike Outreach.
Red Bike?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Jake Lionfields.
Good evening, members of the HUDS committee and everyone watching on YouTube. I'm in the 7th Ward. I'm very proud of my alderwoman for introducing these bills. This is like so exciting because we've been in desperate need of this kind of leadership for a really long time. And I know folks like Christine Gracia, Dr. Megan Green have been supportive of such legislation in the past. But the reason I'm excited right now is because we actually have a chance to pass these bills if enough y'all will stand up. And I want to speak to one experience in particular that I had this week. I'm a volunteer with Freedom Community Center, which, among other things, runs a court watch program in the 22nd Circuit. We had an accused neighbor of ours. He was arrested by the police while he was sleeping in his car, and he was accused of a pretty low-level infraction. Despite our circuit attorney arguing that he should be held without bond, i.e. not getting out of jail before his trial, he was granted a personal recognizance bond, which meant that he could get out while awaiting his trial. So his case, was heard, and he was given a PR, and then we moved on to the next case. And then a little bit later, a clerk came back and announced to the judge, Judge Hogan, that he refused to sign his PR paperwork. And the reason he refused to sign his PR paperwork is because he had nowhere to go, and it was getting cold outside. So we have people who are willing to sit in a deadly jail right now because we don't have enough shelter space, we don't have adequate encampments, we don't have enough affordable housing. People die in the CJC. These issues are interrelated. Y'all need to stand up. Another thing that I've heard is from a couple members of this committee that one of the reasons you couldn't support the current forms of these bills is because we need regional leadership on this issue. But y'all heard the data. 20% of SLPS students are unhoused. 11% of folks wait, I wrote this down, 11% of folks waiting for housing in our city are youth-headed households. We can't wait for Sam Page and folks in the county to do something. We need to do something now. And if the mayor cares about regional collaboration, then she should stand up and provide the leadership and negotiate a regional solution. Inaction is inexcusable. And the accountability for you all is us not voting for you, not donating to you, not knocking doors for you during your re-election campaigns. And we will use that accountability tool. It's one of the best ones we have. So Thank you. Pass these bills. Do something. It is sorely necessary.
Susan Nixon. Susan Nixon.
Hi, my name is Sarah and Nixon, and I'm a resident of the 8th Ward, and I'm also the pretrial organizer at Freedom Community Center, where I help post bonds for people who otherwise might not be able to afford them and help coordinate our Court Watch program. I know that many of you have wondered what more you can do to intervene in our city's deadly jail crisis, given that you don't work at the jail and you don't have any special access to the facility. Like Jake and others have mentioned, as winter approaches, the intersections between the housing and jail crises are becoming even more glaringly apparent in the courtroom. More than merely an intersection, the relationship between criminalization and housing instability is more like a revolving door, as incarceration makes housing more inaccessible and being unhoused itself is criminalized. Take, for example, a man who I saw last week who was aggressively removed from court and denied release after pleading with the judge, stating that after a long period at ERDCC, he recently defeated his homelessness and being in jail at this time would cost him his housing. Or the case of a woman who shared with me this week that she intentionally got caught stealing the night that temperatures dropped below freezing so that she wouldn't risk being out on the streets. The appearance of choice is a false one between risking death on the streets or in the City Justice Center. Shelters may seem like an obvious solution to these cycles of precarity, but limited shelter capacity and limiting eligibility requirements combine to make shelters inaccessible for many. Abolishing the Platten petition process is a necessary step in expanding shelter capacity and doing away with discriminatory practices against people who are on probation and parole. Supporting safe encampments is also a necessary intervention in supporting people towards voluntary, permanent, and trustworthy housing options. I understand that it's difficult to do something that in one sense seems to affirm the existence or the use of encampments, but I think it's crucial to remember that doing nothing is more harmful. The idea that no one should be unhoused or shouldn't need to use the bathroom outside does nothing to change the fact that under these conditions they're forced to. I hope that you all exercise a bit of political courage to do what you can where you are right now to support our unhoused and formerly incarcerated communities, as it's already too late.
Thank you. Alan Summer.
Hello, my name is Alan Summer. I live in Tar Heel South. I am here in support of all three bills. I specifically wanted to speak to 126. I personally believe the city needs to be offering more services to the unhoused. But in the interim, if we could at least quit chasing them around the city and allow the third parties and the individuals that are currently doing the job I believe the city should be doing to allow them to do their job without the city interfering. Also, I wanted to speak to the zoning issue. I am a real estate agent. I had a person contact me a while back and they wanted to open a 24-hour shelter, and I quickly found out that zoning is the barrier to that. I'm still trying to work my way through understanding that, but you brought that up tonight, and I appreciate you bringing that up and getting that corrected, I hope. But anyway, again, I am in support of all three bills. Thank you very much.
Adam Berner.
Hi, I live in the 10th Ward, and I just want to make it very clear. We either pass these bills or people die. Doesn't matter if it's from the cold, if it's from the heat, if it's from dehydration. If we don't pass these bills, people will die. I respect and appreciate the political courage of those who are supporting this bill, but I'm also deeply saddened that this is what we have to fight for, that we are fighting for less discriminatory encampment destruction rules and to make it easier to provide shelter for people. This isn't even a right to decent housing. This isn't even a right to permanent housing, which should be the bare minimum. This is just to reduce the number of deaths. And anybody who doesn't support this has blood on their hands. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Watkins.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Alderwoman Saunier, for introducing this bill and for your all's time. I'm coming before you as someone who has experienced homelessness. I have faced housing insecurity and evictions. I've been separated from pets, my child, and it was really only the courage and the conscience of some people in this room who kept me housed and made sure I didn't end up worse than I already was. And I'm speaking in support of all three bills. I would want to lift up what the COC said about affordable housing and the lack of that. And, okay, I'm sorry, hold on. So actually, let me go back a little bit. I want to start with the Board Bill 26 and say that using police to enforce oppressive systems is not the answer. I think a 30-day notice to disrupt encampments is standard that even tenants get, and I think that's reasonable. This bill addresses protecting family units and means of survival and well-being, providing toilets, hand washing stations, and waste management. These are services that we all have access to in the city, and I feel that this bill does a great job of affirming that right for the unhoused, and it's our responsibility to bring those protections to them. As far as Board Bill 127, reducing barriers, I work for a nonprofit and we canvass, and I don't use minivan because it only gives us access to voters. And when I talk to the community and neighborhoods, I want to hear a whole picture. I want to talk to everyone, even those who may not be registered or may not be homeowners. So I think it's important to expand that process. And also, again, Board Bill 128, supporting efforts to increase shelter beds because evictions are on the rise. Again, the price of housing and utilities are increasing. And folks are reaching out from all areas for shelter. They call me when they are getting evicted. There's, again, people in this room who have helped me connect people to shelters, and it would be better to have scattered shelters throughout the city rather than everyone just congregating to the north side, as we've heard. And there's so many reasons that a person can become homeless, and I think we should protect all them. And we voted for some of y'all for progressive reasons, and we want to see those changes in our city. Thank you.
Dawn Smith. Dawn Smith.
Hi, I'm a resident of the 9th Ward, and I wanted to thank Alderman Browning for responding to questions from my neighborhood recently. We really appreciate that. I'm speaking against a portion of Bill 127, specifically about the proposal to remove the plat and petition process, because I believe that it's undemocratic. And I fear that it would open up the city to abuse for other reasons not related to shelters. And I say that I'm sympathetic to this issue, and especially with the plat and petition process. I'm a previous resident of Decatur, Georgia, and I had worked on improving some zoning and boundary issues within the city, and actually an unincorporated area. And we worked very hard to get a change, but we had to go through a similar process with homeowners and voters in that area. And unfortunately, we were not successful. But we had to accept that people were not willing, what we had wanted for change, and we had to respect that process. Especially that if we had tried to push forward or do other things without being democratic in that process, that people would have probably come out against us even more harder than they had. The other thing I wanted to just briefly say is we had a number of other people from our neighborhood come to testify tonight, but unfortunately they were locked out of the building. They could not get in. I think they had expected to be able to park in the lot and could not do so. And their request was to potentially have additional time or an additional meeting to be able to have their voices heard. But thank you.
Willow High.
I am also a resident of the 9th Ward, and I wanted to also thank Michael Browning for being mindful in his decision-making, because I do not support 126, 127, or 128, and the reason is not because I don't care about the homeless, and I believe truly that Michael Browning also cares about the homeless, as do most of the people who do not support this bill. And we do want to pass bills that will help them, but I think that this is all a huge hodgepodge of too many things all at once, and we can't just go about things by throwing a pail of slop at the wall and seeing what sticks and making a big mess in the process. While I think that this is a genuine and commendable humanitarian effort, I think it should be approached with extreme caution. We have a lot of actual case studies in other cities where bills similar to this have been passed and they don't necessarily work out so well. So these types of efforts are often misguided and can lead to results that not only do not help the homeless ultimately, but are devastating to the surrounding communities. And I fear that this bill may create challenges for the city residents and local businesses by removing some of the basic tools and protections that help us to keep our community clean, safe, and inviting. Thank you.
Andy Everding.
Thank you for having us tonight. My name is Andy Everding. I'm a proud resident of Ward 2 Boulevard Heights neighborhood with my wife and young daughter. For work, I'm a certified safety professional. I have over 10 years of construction safety experience. My whole job revolves around safety and caring about other people every single day. But the people I care about most are the ones that are at my house. So earlier this year, I had a particular situation. I live on one of the parks, and we had a homeless or unhoused encampment there. So, you know, it was okay for a while, and then somebody forgot to lock the car. We get a bunch of stuff still out of a car. I come home, I see that my hose on the side of my house is being used. Also, okay, what are we gonna do? That's fine. Moving forward, you know, there was a few different instances that we had with these folks. And the main one, we had an individual screaming at the top of their lungs, hitting things with a baseball bat. You know, it really riled us up, and I got pretty excited about it. So, you know, calling the police, called the park rangers, and all these things. And basically, they told me it's a political issue and they can't do anything about it, which was quite disheartening for me. It's very, you know, why am I paying taxes for any of this? So finally, I went to the neighborhood association, talked to our alderman, and he ended up helping me out. And I think we found housing for 2 of those individuals, and one of them, they left. But there's more people moving in at this time. One person just left, but it's a continuing issue. And I think there's a lot of good in all of these bills. But the one thing with the unauthorized encampments, having lived next to one, I don't know if anyone else here has. It's concerning for the safety of my family, and I have empathy for all of these folks, and I know we can find the money to help them. But I just don't think 126 is the way that this is going to work. So, thank you.
Blake Strode.
Well, good evening, committee members. My name is Blake Strode. I'm a resident of the 10th Ward, proudly represented by Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. And I'm also executive director of Arch City Defenders. And I'm here tonight really to share just a couple of comments and then an encouragement. And first, I want to echo and underscore what we've heard about the criminalization of homelessness. And many people have spoken powerfully to that. We see that every day in our work, and I think that really needs to be centered when considering these bills, particularly considering that now the decriminalization elements have been stripped out of them. Something I want to be clear I'm not in favor of, but I think it speaks to the desire of Alderwoman Saunier to find consensus and to build some support for these bills. What we know is as long as these things are criminalized, people who are unhoused are going to be funneled into the criminal legal system. We see it every day. For the 8.5 years I've been at Arch City Defenders, I cannot tell you how many people we've represented because they were unhoused and they picked up tickets and warrants and charges and nights in jail over loitering or trespassing or unruly behavior, whatever the pretext is. So choosing not to provide safe spaces for unhoused people, choosing not to expand shelter options for unhoused people is funneling them directly into jails. And that not only is unhealthy and harmful, it's also very costly. For those of you that are concerned about the costs of these bills, it is extremely costly when we warehouse people in our jails. So I think that's something that needs to be kept in mind at all times. The second thing I want to offer is one of the hats that I wear is as a member of the steering committee of the People's Plan, which hopefully you're all familiar with, but that's a coalition of over 50 organizations in St. Louis that are deeply civically engaged, that care so much about this city, that have a vision for what this city can be, and that are very active in the wards of every single member of this Board of Aldermen. And we are closely watching this issue. Hopefully you all received a letter the other day from the People's Plan that spoke to our support for the Unhoused Bill of Rights and support for all of these bills, because we know that marginalized, unhoused people are the canaries in the coal mine. And if we do not care for the people that are living on the margins in our society, it will reverberate throughout St. Louis. We see that every day. So this is a priority for us. We're watching this closely. We'll continue to watch it closely. And I just want to encourage all of you. We hear so many people come up here and say, I care so much about the unhoused. Well, we have a choice.
That's time, Mr. Strode.
This is a choice to do something. So let's do it.
Thank you. Tim, nope.
As everybody said, thanks again for taking the time to hear from your constituents. I think we're all here to try to help these unhoused people. We all know the current system's not working. All of the pop-up encampments everywhere are not safe. We're all unaware of this. Speaking in regards to 126, the safe encampments, I think we just saw some really good pilot programs. They seem to be a great idea. They seem to work, these sanctioned safe encampments. However, I think we need to know more about how we're going to fund them. I think there's been some really good pilot programs here, so I hope you guys are doing your research on what the budget's going to look like to run one of these, how we're actually going to safely do it. As you saw, it was not a cheap endeavor for these people to run these small-scale operations, and what you're about to undertake is a lot bigger scale than what they've done. So I think you need to think through that very, very hard, very clear. And then in that same 126 also was the unauthorized encampments, unsanctioned, having a process to shut them down, having to go to the task force, having to vote on that. I don't understand why, if we had a safe encampment, we would allow these unauthorized encampments whatsoever. I don't know why that would go to a board. I think we should be trying to get all of these people into a more safe living environment in these sanctioned encampments. Moving on to 127, the patent petition. I agree wholeheartedly with the person earlier that said by removing that, it's an undemocratic process. Right now, it allows the neighbors to have a say in what does go in and not go in their neighborhood. It's a very similar process to get a liquor license in this city. As it was said, that's an old antiquated process was one of the arguments for it, and that zero shelters have been able to get through that process in 15 years. We all know many liquor licenses have been able to get through that process in the last 15 years. So it leads to me then that the constituents are saying they don't want these shelters in their neighborhood. I don't think we should remove that power from the people. I think by doing that, it's an overreach. I think you're bypassing the democratic process of letting the citizens have a say in their neighborhoods, enforcing something on them that they don't want. It was mentioned earlier that doing something's better than nothing. I think that's a fallacy. In fact, you could do much more harm by doing something that's not planned out well, by opening up one of these encampments that's not run properly, that's not budgeted for properly. We could do a lot of harm to these unhoused people. So I don't think no action or action is better than no action. Sometimes no action is better. We need to make sure we think through our actions very, very thoroughly before we enter them. It was also mentioned earlier that by someone, we'll be watching how our officials handle this, and we'll all be voting. I too will be watching how my officials are handling this, and we'll be voting accordingly. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ellie Gunn.
Hi, I'm Ellie Gund. I live in the 7th Ward. And I want to start by saying that all people have a right to housing, but because I'm a public school teacher, I'm going to focus on how this crisis impacts our students. About 20% of children in SLPS don't have stable housing, and according to one of our presenters, about half of the families that they see are unsheltered. That means the kids are sleeping in cars every night or in tents. The people who are not sleeping in cars and tents are doubling up with family members, sleeping on couches, sleeping on floors. What does this look like in our public school classrooms? Well, if you've got a class of 20 students, which is pretty small in terms of class sizes for SLPS, that means 4 of your students, on average, don't have a stable place to sleep at night. That means 4 of your students are struggling to stay awake in class. 4 of your students don't have any place to do homework or study for tests. 4 of your students are having trouble accessing showers, laundry facilities, are worried about being bullied because they're showing up to school in unclean clothes with their bodies not clean. That means that 4 of your students are missing school repeatedly because of transportation difficulties, because they're moving frequently. That means 4 of your students might be moving between schools multiple times a year because they can't stay in the same area of the city. How can we expect our public school system to be successful when the city is not supporting the students in the public school system? Homelessness is a poverty choice, and it is a poverty choice that the city of St. Louis is making right now actively. We don't have to live in a city where 20% of our students are unhoused. That is not something that is inevitable. That is a choice we're making for the way that we spend our public dollars. I urge you to act with courage, the kind of courage that it takes for a middle school student to switch to a new school in the middle of a school year without clean clothes. Think about that student when you're thinking about the courage that it takes to vote on this bill. Do you have that kind of courage that it takes for that middle school student to show up to school knowing that they'll be made fun of, knowing that they won't be academically successful because of things out of their control, but things that are in your control? I urge you to act with courage. I urge you to take care of the students, the children in our city. Support these 3 bills, please.
Matthew Cotabra?
Thank you, Chair and members. That's Katraba, just for your information. So thank you for the opportunity to voice my opposition to the current unhoused bills 126, 127, and 128 being discussed on this committee and with the help of our citizens. I was able to watch the entire first meeting online and can appreciate the empathetic support for these bills to make the lives of the homeless in St. Louis less stressful. I agree with that. What I did see from the review of the meeting was this is not a serious attempt to fix the serious problem for the homeless and the citizens of the city. I would recommend these bills not be allowed to get out of committee and have the capable staff of the Board of Aldermen in this committee go back to the drawing board, fix some of these things. I saw some of them on the board earlier that it looks like they've already reconsidered. This is good. A couple of the reasons for my request are as follows. Panhandlers are everywhere in our community, and sometimes they become irritated and aggressive to the point of threatening and even attacking persons who are not able to or do not wish to give them monetary support. These instances are increasing and become dangerous to our vulnerable neighbors. The Platten petition action should be maintained to allow neighbors the opportunity to hear what new things may be coming and give the consent when possible and protect their neighbors when it is needed. The practice of supporting the unhoused has exploded in numbers, and there is ample proof the surrounding counties are taking advantage of the city in transporting and dumping these persons they don't want to deal with. This would be addressed, or could be addressed, in a new bill that would get cooperation from St. Louis County, St. Charles County, and our Illinois neighbors to share in the responsibility and the cost to address this issue on a regional level. Finally, and not least, let me go back to that on the regional level. I want to address one thing. There is a concern for the vets. The vets have an issue. They're unhoused vets. They are currently being helped in some ways, such as the tiny houses, and I understand that they're making progress there. The average time for a vet to be unhoused is about 300 days. And they help them with their drug habits.
I'm sorry, that's time. You may forward your comments to the Board of Aldermen clerk.
Thank you, I did by email.
Okay.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. State Rep Kimberly Collins.
Okay, good evening. I did not prepare a speech, but so I am State Representative Kimberly Ann Collins, and I represent the city of St. Louis. I do not see district boundaries. However, I was elected as the Missouri State Representative for the 77 District, and I'm also the president for the Ville and Greaterville Neighborhood Association. I'm a resident of North City, St. Louis, and I am the founder of Kennerly Shelter. And so it is a shelter that sits in North City, St. Louis. But not only is it a shelter, just to give you a little bit of background, it is the access site for drug and substance abuse in the city of St. Louis. And so that means anyone coming out of incarceration and anyone who is coming off of the streets that has a issue with drug and substance abuse is able to come in and do intake and get services. Not just treatment, not just reentry services, but also recovery support housing. So recovery support housing is a form of congregate living. Some people will call it a boarding house, but it is a recovery house. They offer services, and it's a pathway for individuals to stay focused on recovery. And so I say all of that to say, not only were people able to come into Kennerly Shelter and shelter food, but they were able to come in and get other supportive services like drug and substance abuse. So we opened up last winter. We ran full, most of these people in here volunteers at the shelter, but we ran 100%, including Alderman Michael Browning, who I didn't understand how he was at the shelter almost every day, him and his wife. I didn't understand how they were at the shelter almost every day and he was running an election. But majority of these people in here are volunteers of Kennerly Shelter is 100% volunteer, not city funded, and it is of course not state funded because I don't personally have a 501c3. I have not read the bills 1,000% fully. Alderwoman Sonye, I know I owe you 5,000 calls back. My phone goes dead quick, and same thing with Committee Chair Hubbard. I owe you 1,000 calls back too. But I do appreciate the work specifically that you're doing. I know the intent, your intent behind this is passionate, and it's coming from a place of we need to do something. Me speaking in terms as a North City resident, just speaking particularly for Platinum Petition, every neighborhood is different. Every neighborhood operates different. And so for me personally, getting signatures would not be a problem. Talking to some other providers in North City, St. Louis, getting signatures would not be a problem. However, listening to other folks who live in other neighborhoods, and maybe the individuals in those neighborhoods may not fully understand homelessness to the extent that we understand it, it may be harder for them to get signatures. I get that. I do want to express the urgency of, as you always say, to do something, right? The urgency of making sure individuals are not out on the streets. We know that homelessness is a 365-day thing of the year, right? It's not just pertinent to the wintertime. I want to urge that the Board of Aldermen reach out to all of the providers, because we have a load of providers in North City, St. Louis, who may feel differently about this legislation. And I know you have called me twice, but prior to that, the Board of Aldermen, the President's office has not reached out to North City providers. The Mayor's office has not reached out to North City providers. And even though we're based in North City, we still serve the entire city, but we're based in North City and we have voices too. So I do thank you for this legislation that you're putting forth. I cannot speak to if I'm going to be in opposition or in support of, because I do know somebody earlier said something about, well, those who are coming back into society that's coming from prison could possibly be on parole or probation, and those individuals may not be able to vote, but they still do pay taxes too, and they have a right to have a voice in what we do in our community as well. I totally agree with that. However, I think that some type of process still needs to be in place, because what we've seen in North City, St. Louis, and I'm speaking as a North City, St. Louis resident, is we've seen bad actors come into our neighborhoods that have tried to benefit off of the backs of poor individuals. And I'm just speaking as a resident of North City, St. Louis, what I've seen in my neighborhood. And so recently, last year, I dealt with an individual who said, hey, you can open up a homeless shelter here, but then wanted to know what was in it for them, how much money would they get. And I said, hey, this is a full volunteer shelter. And so that is initially why we ended up going to another site, and we scrambled to try to get the other site set up, which we did, which was Kennerly Shelter. And so I'm just speaking for, as a North City resident, we've seen bad actors. And that is a lot of the times, that's why you will see people who live in North City, St. Louis say, hey, we like Platinum Petition, even with liquor. I actually love Platinum Petition when it comes to liquor, because people, every time somebody wants to come and open up a bar or a restaurant or a hookah bar, or whatever they're trying to open up in our neighborhoods, which we totally don't need because we're oversaturated, they have to come knock on my door and get my signature. And then that feels like I have a voice in the process. I will also say that, again, reaching out to North City providers is more than just me over in North City, St. Louis. It's a load of folks, right, who may not have shelter services, but they do homeless services, they do the outreach, they do reentry services, they do a lot of work around the unhoused residents field. And so I need to read the legislation probably before I speak, but this is just me talking as a North City resident and somebody who is a provider based in North City, but we serve the entire city. I get the intent of the legislation and I appreciate it, but as I don't know really if I could support getting rid of the Platinum Petition process, and it's just me speaking from the heart because I live in North City and we have seen bad actors. I'm going to also throw this out there. I don't know if Dismas House is here. Dismas House is bad actors, and I wouldn't want them coming and open up a shelter in my neighborhood. We wouldn't let them come open up a halfway house, and we're not against halfway houses. we stood against Dismas House because they're about money. And in this field, when you're working in this field, you have to do the work from the heart, and it's not about profit. And so that's just where I stand right now.
Thank you so much. All right, do we have any more speakers?
That would be all the speakers. For
Okay, Vice Chair, we're gonna close. Did you sign up? Oh, we do need you to sign up, and then you can come right up. No, it's not fair to them to let someone else be if they haven't spoken one time yet. I know. Did you know he needed a sign language? Right here, with the hat on. You got to push the button, sir, so when it turns green. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Milton Turner, and I'm homeless, and I've been homeless, maybe 2 years now. I didn't become homeless because I didn't pay my rent or anything. I became homeless because I lived in U City, and I paid my rent on time. I went to work every day, working for Triad Manufacturers, unloading tractor trailers. I had 2 bilateral hernias removed. I couldn't return back to work unless I had it done. Okay, I had it done. I went back to work. They put me on light duty. Then after 2 weeks, they want me to do the same thing over again. No happening. So I can't pay the rent in U City. It was $740 through Ramlet Enterprise. And he made the decision after my lease was up for a whole year. He said, well, Milton, it seems like you're struggling. So, and I'm not going to renew the lease. So I had 30 days to get out, and I've been homeless ever since. Okay. I've been out here with the homeless people here, respecting your area. I'm Milton, the one that will clean up that back every day. I did it on my own, just because I appreciate you letting me put my tent there, and I had somewhere out of the rain and everything else. I cleaned it up every day, and then all the people that were there, they decided to follow behind me. I was a good, perfect example for them. I was the rock for them, and I still is. A lot of people see me, they look up to me because I try to steer them in the right path. They like how I carry myself and everything else. But there's some things that you really should know about the shelters. I've been there. You go into the shelter, you sign this paper for about 6 months, and you're to find a place to stay within that time frame. Some of us do, some of us don't. I was there for a month, and I left because St. Peter and Paul, someone bought that building, okay? It's from what I was told, someone bought it, and that's why they're closing that one. So I left. But the thing is, we have to leave out of there at 5:30 to 6. By 6 o'clock, everybody's gone. Nobody can return until like 6:30 or 7 o'clock. Some of us are not up to part as healthy as I am. I'm 58 years old and I've been doing it, but a lot of them can't. So they just sit around, they don't have nowhere to go sleep or lay their head or wrap up, even when it's starting to get cold like this, and they be tired, they want to rest. And I know because I've been the same way. And that's why a lot of them just say, well, skip the shelter because I got to get out and be out all day. I can't rest. I can't, if you're going to walk around all day.
I'm sorry, Mr. Turner. That's
But
time.
it's real important that you know that.
Thank you for your voice.
Thank you. We have one more young lady. Sidwell.
The microphone, you got to pick it up. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sidwell Hychek. I am the co-founder of Lifeline Aid Group, which is a public charity that uses grassroots community support to help the homeless get into housing and shelter. I got my start on this work as a winter outreach volunteer. I've been checking tents in snow and ice for human beings since about 2016. The work I've done has been difficult and dangerous, but mostly emotionally taxing. And this is because of the conditions of people that I have seen. I can't tell you what it feels like to check every single winter on every single tent in this region to make sure that the inhabitant is still alive. Now, I want you to put yourself in my shoes and go through that mental process. And then I want you to just cry just a little bit and think about what it feels like to keep doing that year after year after year. Additionally, climate change has now made summers really difficult and really dangerous for homeless to survive. We see examples of heat stroke often. We see people with their legs so swollen they can't even move. And this is the case, obviously, in winter as well, but as things get more and more hot every summer and we have these terrible heat waves, it's projected that at some point the Midwest will become a heat belt. For the entire country, it'll be worse here first because it's so humid, because of the wet bulb temperatures. So at some point, if we don't have a system set up for people to be inside during the worst temperatures of the summer, they will be cooked alive within the next couple decades. This is a situation that we have got to take very seriously. We have to be able to establish emergency shelters, and by that I mean zero barrier shelters, shelters that are accepting of people, that care for people. Mr. Browning, Alderman Browning, I just want to thank you again for how you took over in the kitchen that one day at Kennerly Shelter when poor Mr. Demetrius Bruton came in with all his digits frozen off from frostbite. You took over in the kitchen, and I really appreciated that because there was literally no one else to help in that time of need other than the couple of the folks that were holding it down. And it turned out I needed to take that guy to the hospital because he was in such severe pain, he was nonverbal. He was rocking back and forth. And unfortunately, this is really sad, but after a period of stays at different institutions, Mr. Bruton passed away on June 9th. We have to have better solutions for people. Last year, there was a man that was inebriated and he passed away on December 23rd at Cates and King of the Highway. You see, when people are drinking outside, they think that they're warm, and then they freeze to death. If we don't have emergency barrier shelters in every single ward and outreachers that can help shelter people and get them inside, even when they don't know they need shelter,
I'm
we will
sorry,
continue to see
Sidwell.
deaths. I firmly support all three bills. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had some comments and some remarks prepared, but I'm gonna just throw that out the window. Honestly, I feel super emotional right now, so I'm just trying to get all of my thoughts gathered. I think ultimately today, what I really want to push us to do is to acknowledge the failure of the status quo. I heard a lot of people today talk about democracy. Democracy was never made for a majority of the people that are in our communities now. Democracy often doesn't include immigrants in our international community, which makes up a third of our city. Many of them are cut out from the decision-making process. Democracy in itself, in order for us to have a democracy that serves everybody, we have to make it so. It's not like we're in systems that are inherently good and inherently working for everyone. There was someone who was supposed to make it tonight and could not make it tonight, and I told her that I would still speak on her behalf and just kind of mention her story. And so she's a mother, and she works in healthcare, and she has a 15-year-old son, and she's been choosing to stay on the streets for about 4 months now because she cannot find a place that will accept her and her teenage son. This is someone who gets up and goes to work every day. This is someone who looks like you and I. If you saw her, you would not, she does not fit into the typical stigmas of unhoused, but cannot be served. And during my time on the Board of Education, I saw these folks over and over and over again. Majority of our unhoused population does not look like the people that we see in media or the people that we see in tents. And so I really want us to make sure that when we talk about these processes and we are talking about this word democracy, democracy does not look like a process. In a city where over 50% of your residents are tenants and less than 30% of your folks vote, democracy doesn't look like a process that's limited to just property owners and just voters. Like, that's just what it is. But I also want to a part of what I think I've been experiencing and thinking deeply about is I've had conversations, and many people have sent us all the same emails. We've seen emails in support. We've seen emails in opposition. And so I just think also that I want to say, for me, I don't think that you run for office or you get into positions of change so that you can keep your name on the seat. I think that you run for office and you get into positions of change so that you can cause change. Does that mean that you will have to make decisions that are sometimes unpopular, that bring you backlash, that cause consequences? Sure. If you are transforming systems and you are bringing about systematic change, it's going to come with backlash. It's going to come with resistance. But we just made a decision that conditional use was good enough for Airbnbs. And all these conversations about safety, we've all seen all the killings and the murders and the violent crimes we've had in Airbnbs. Nobody said we should put plat and petition for process right then. There's a bill on the floor for liquor licenses, for changing plat and petition from that. And so we are having all these conversations, and I would be remiss if I didn't, as a fellow city leader, make sure that as we talk about liquor licenses and Airbnbs, that we also talk about poor people who are just trying to stay alive and who are just going to get connected to services for the basics. And so when we talk about protections of displacement, I think that we have to have a policy and we have to have a procedure that makes it clear for all the expectations involved. We are going to have to decommission another encampment. That is going to happen. I don't know if it will happen next week. I don't know if it will happen next month, but it is going to happen. And so the least we could do is have a process that is clear for everyone involved. When we talk about safe camping areas, I think one of the silent messages I keep hearing people say, well, what does that cost? Where is the money going to come from? First of all, if you don't think that poor people are worthy of public dollars, fundamentally. And so I'll just put that on record, that part of having an intentional encampment is saying that poor people are worthy of public dollars. The other thing that I want to discount is that majority of the unhoused are the working poor. So it is their tax money that is coming and being reinvested into them. Is it going to be an easy process? Is it going to be simple? Is it going to be without complications? No. But there are lucrative clubs and lucrative businesses and other places in our community that have they don't get shut down, they don't get ended. And so for me, when we're talking about intentional encampment, that is the place where you can go, and if you have been a person who has had a chronic mental health illness and unable to get access to treatment, if you are a person who's been an alcoholic, whatever your case may be, you can go and you can start to get stabilization, because a lot of what I didn't hear mentioned from my time as a mental health advocate, I would work with people who went into unhoused without a substance use issue. But if you're on the streets day after day without housing, without food, without shelter, that drug becomes your coping mechanism, and it seems more and more like a better option. You feel like you don't have anything else, so I might as well do this. And so thinking about the positions that being unhoused and not having access to your basic services puts you in. Again, is it a bold move? Absolutely. But this is the same city. We did a bold move with reproductive justice. We said we're going to take that to the courts and we're going to make you tell us we can't do it. We were willing to do it with that. We're doing bold moves with gun legislation right now. Some of us are carriers of those bills, and we're saying again, we're going to do whatever it takes to protect people and get these guns off our streets. We need to have that same sense of urgency for our unhoused population. Many of us have said, and we'll all agree, that poverty is the father of crime. That as long as you have have-nots, you are going to have issues in your community. This unhoused issue affects people who are housed. I've gotten emails from constituents, hey, Alderwoman, I don't know what else to do, but there's someone unhoused in the home next to me. I don't want to call the police on them, but it's becoming a safety hazard. Oftentimes, you can contact different entities, but the reality is oftentimes there's no capacity, there's no option. And so what I want to say in closing, and again, I know 127 Plaid Petition, it is racist and it is classist. Plaid Petition is a racist and a classist process. It is what it is. Most of the folks who live in the building with me, a lot of my friends, a lot of people that are a part of our community, they don't own property yet, and the market is not getting more and more affordable. So that's happening less and less. They may not be registered to vote, but even if you are registered to vote or you are a property owner, you have to be at home when people come knock your door, or you've missed your chance for engagement. So even if you do check those boxes, you've got a minimal window to have your voice in the process. And so that has to change because it's not effective and it doesn't work. And democracy has to include all of us, or it's not really democracy. And so I just want to thank you all for giving me your time. I want to make sure we're clear on what we're talking about. We're talking about having a process for when we decommission encampments. And I say we because we're all city leaders, so we tend to get the responsibility of whatever the city decides. We're talking about having a safe camping area and giving people access to their basic needs. We're talking about changing our zoning codes to allow for shelters because we know that there is a deficit of them and that they are not allowed in any of our zoning areas. We're talking about eliminating Plaid Petition. That is a racist and classist and antiquated process. And so I think all those conversations are important. I look forward to hearing from my colleagues. I heard much of the feedback tonight. I am working on a committee substitute. We do have to send some things back through Planning Commission to put in some of the changes that I discussed tonight. I just ask that you please reach out to me, and you please do find the time to meet with me. If we have not met yet, that you tell me your concerns and you tell me your thoughts and you help me get this to a workable point where we can deliver something to the people of St. Louis that will work for all of us. I don't believe in trickle-down economics, but I do believe that when you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. Thank you.
All right. Alderman Cone, you have any comments? You have any comments? Alderwoman Schweitzer.
I want to take a second and just thank everybody for coming out tonight. I know it's getting really late, 8:40, so thank you so much for being here. I know some people who are listening at home. Everything great? Okay. I thought there was chaos. Everybody, for people who are listening at home, I know some folks were in a situation where the door was locked or they weren't able to get into parking, and I sincerely apologize for that. I do not know what miscommunication occurred to make that the case that you are in this evening. So sorry, your voice is so important. I want to make sure that you know that you can send your comments, your thoughts through to the Board of Aldermen via email, written comment. If you send anything to me, I'll make sure the whole committee gets it. And we've had a lot of different comments on this bill going back and forth on these bills. We have some information in front of us regarding the millions and millions of dollars that have been spent on unhoused services in the city of St. Louis since 2021. We have information in front of us about the city of St. Louis having over 3 times the number of beds in the St. Louis County, almost the same number of beds in the city of St. Louis than the rest of the state. So, you know, I do want to clear up any misconceptions that the city of St. Louis is not doing anything to address the homeless population. We heard from providers tonight. I understand a lot of folks think it's not enough, but I am not willing to say that the city is not doing anything, especially when there's such good work that is happening, and those folks deserve to be recognized. I've made it clear through multiple comments to the media, on my own platforms, that I do not support the bills as written. And just to pull back the political curtain a little bit, you know, I can only count at most 3 votes for these bills at the Board of Aldermen right now. There need to be 8 votes to pass the Board of Aldermen. There are not votes on this committee for the bills to get out of committee as written. There are certainly not votes of the full board to get them passed. So at this time, I'm not quite sure why the bills have not been pulled back and new bills have not been introduced, because that is the reality of the situation on the ground. And I think most of us like to operate in the world of reality. And so at this point, we're spending a lot of your time on bills that do not have a chance to move through the Board of Aldermen as written. The committee substitute that was talked about is not in front of anyone at the board. No one on this committee has seen the committee substitute that was discussed tonight. That is not how this process is supposed to work. We are supposed to, by rule, receive committee substitutes 36 hours before a committee meeting. That did not occur. The board, this body did not adopt the committee substitute that was in front of us last time. So the bill that we all have in front of us still has many provisions that my constituents have been told are out of the bill. That is not true. That is not what is being in front of the Board of Aldermen right now. I heard a lot of comments about people voting for us. If we vote for this, voting for us. If we don't vote for this, unfortunately for all of you, we are here now. And we are the ones who are going to be making these decisions and talking about it. I don't respond particularly well to threats either direction, and I hope that folks know that when you vote for me, you vote for me to listen to my constituents. The vast majority of my constituents are not in favor of these bills as written. I think there needs to be new bills that we can build consensus on if we're talking about building consensus. I feel very strongly that we need to have new bills that can build consensus because these bills are not it. So thank you for your time. Thank you for coming tonight.
Alderman Browning.
Thank you, and thank you all for your testimony tonight. Sid, Drew, it's really good to see you. Representative Collins, if you're still here, always love to see you. And just all the testimony tonight, just incredible to hear. And I appreciate the residents who did come out. I share my colleagues' concern that people were walked out of the building, and want to make sure that we hear from those people. So I also echo that you can always email me, and I will make sure to pass that on to the clerk to make sure that we have that in the record. It is clear that we need increased shelter capacity. We need more options, and we need diverse options for people to be housed. Board Bills 127 and 128 are a way to do that, and I don't support removing community input from the process. I do look forward to making sure that we can come up with a process that helps shelters open while ensuring that they're beneficial to their communities and residents. I don't think this is a either-or situation. But I'm asking, because it's really important, I'm asking that the oversight process be its own standalone bill. My colleague spoke about building a bill that we can build consensus around and get the votes to actually pass the Board of Aldermen. To actually act on this issue, we need something that can pass the full board. That is essential. So it's really important that the oversight process be its own standalone bill, as it's going to need a lot more detail and it has a lot of moving parts to make sure that we get it right to meet this really desperate need in our city. I can't comment or ask questions about the revised Board Bill 126 tonight because I can't read it. While the changes described tonight are a step in the right direction, it's my job to thoroughly review every piece of legislation in front of me. The intent of the bill, while noble, doesn't matter. It really is what's on the page, and that's our job as legislators. So I look forward to reading the new bill when it's provided. My only question for the sponsor tonight is, when will that be? And will there be an updated fiscal note attached to it? Okay, point of order is noted. Would the Alderwoman from the 7th yield to questions?
Vice Chair, will you yield to questions from Alderman Browning?
Yes.
And thank you, Alderman from the 3rd, for keeping us in line. So Alderwoman, yes, thank you for, again, bringing light to this issue, for bringing really an opportunity for people to come and speak here tonight. So my question is simple, just when will we get the updated version so that we can go through it, and will there be an updated fiscal note for that bill?
There will be, so what I thought I was trying to be clear in my comments tonight, that the reason why you all don't have, part of the reason you don't have a committee substitute is for the changes that have been proposed. They have to go back through I can't just put a committee substitute in front of you of bills that have to go back through the process again. That wouldn't be accurate. So that's why you don't have that. I want to get you all I'm talking to the building division and the planning and commission right now to figure out when's the next date that can go on the agenda to go back through. But in the meantime, I need you all's engagement and work to know, many of the changes that were proposed to be changed came from conversation between you and I of things that would make you more comfortable with them. But I'm working through having conversations with the rest of our colleagues so that I can get all of them through. I have about 6 meetings set up for the next week. But I will be able to let you all know as far as 127 and 128 to change those changes. It's not just a committee substitute. It will have to be a brand new bill that goes back through planning and commission for those changes. I think they have a hearing on the 15th is their next date, but I have to figure out if this can go on the agenda in time for that and also get enough feedback from you all. So I don't have, if you're talking about a committee substitute for the changes in 126, you will have that probably by Tuesday. But for the changes in 127 and 128, it will end up being brand new bills because it has to go through planning commission and get refiled.
Okay, and when are we next planning to have a hearing on this?
Well, we have a hearing set for November 7th for this, or 8th? 7th. And I'm hesitant to cancel those, knowing how many folks, if there are folks that couldn't make it tonight that still have public comment to give. I'm not sure. Myself and the chair will have to meet and talk about how to go about that, since there's people who weren't able to come tonight, since we haven't had the virtual ability to attend yet. But the next date is set for November 17th, and you'll have a committee, November 7th, and you'll have a committee substitute for 126 by that time. But planning and commission will have to go through its process, so it won't be another bill for those yet.
Okay, thank you. I would respectfully request that we get the committee substitute with ample time before the next meeting so that we can thoroughly review it. I want to engage in this in good faith, but it's hard to do so when I can't read the bill. So as my colleague noted, this is not how the process is supposed to work. It was a little weird tonight to have a lot of discussion, have public input when I knew the public couldn't even read the current bill that's in front of us. And that's not their fault. But this is important that we really have people talking about the subject matter in front of us. I think the testimony we heard tonight does speak to the urgent need in our city to look at this issue seriously, and I want to make sure that we're doing that. But
yeah, you seriously got a committee substitute last time. Last time I had a committee substitute, you got in enough window for that hearing and enough time to read it. So I'll make sure that that you get the next committee substitute and enough time for the next one as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, and just to be clear, we need to adopt it in order to get it so the public can read it too, to get it on the website. So,
yeah, I definitely will do that. I wish Alderman Schweitzer could have flagged that for me or you before this hearing, but absolutely, I'll make sure that I do that.
Yeah, apologies. I didn't realize until earlier today. Yeah.
Alderman Cone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any questions, but I do have a few remarks. And first, thank you to everyone for being here tonight. I know it's been many hours at this point, and this committee's been particularly active this week. We had a almost 5-hour-long meeting yesterday, so appreciate my colleagues being here as well. Listening to the public and your perspectives and thoughts on all of these board bills. I have stood on the floor of the Board of Aldermen for many years, and have very clearly stated housing is a human right. Everyone is entitled to be able to have a home, and should be able to have a home. But I've also been clear that the way the city handles these things and our processes are very much broken. Many of the things that we talk about in terms of access to housing, quality of housing, those are systems that are broken right now. In the past, I've mentioned things like people being able to apply for housing and going through an application process. we don't have, really a lot of structure in place if there's discrimination taking place with respect to tenant screening and things of that nature. Particularly with low-income individuals, people who have had housing, revoked and or have been evicted in the past, or if there are people who, with their sexual orientation or gender identity, have been refused housing. CREA is not very well staffed for anyone who has experienced those types of discriminatory situations. We don't have an adequately staffed CREA department in the city of St. Louis that would follow up on those types of complaints and those types of concerns. The quality of housing, that is something that I talk about in my neighborhood all the time. It's something that is pervasive, particularly in North St. Louis and Southeast City, where the quality of housing that is provided is a big concern. People rent, places and pay, a monthly rent, and, there's plaster falling off of walls, windows that are missing or broken, outdated, materials and appliances, and if those appliances are even working. I had a neighbor in the 4-family next to me last winter was without heat the entire winter without heat. They had to go out and buy 6 space heaters to keep their apartment heated during last winter. Last winter was particularly brutal, if you all don't recall, but that's unacceptable. But our building division is not adequately staffed to address those types of issues. You're lucky in the city of St. Louis if you even have an inspector come out for the initial occupancy permit inspection in a housing conservation district, let alone follow up on all of the violations that may occur during that process. So, in most cases, we are not staffed to address those types of concerns that continually come up in the city of St. Louis. It's really shameful. And I think that we could do much, much better dealing with those situations. I think with respect to these 3 board bills, there's been a lot of discussion and talk about intentional encampments for many years now. And I want to be clear, with respect to my position on intentional encampments, we need intentional encampments in the city of St. Louis. We absolutely need intentional encampments. I've recommended intentional encampments when I was alderperson of the 25th Ward. I'm now alderperson of the 3rd Ward. Those discussions fell flat, to be quite clear. And now one of the locations that I recommended is actually an unintentional encampment with several people living there, and without any of the supportive services that we're talking about with the intentional encampment. So I think that we're doing an injustice by saying that these things aren't going to happen, or that these things don't exist, or that the problem doesn't exist, and that we don't have the ability to have solutions that are oriented towards those issues. And I think certainly with respect to the intentional encampments, and certainly with respect to how we address the encampments that are in our city currently when they're being quote unquote decommissioned, is just plain unfair. We need a process in place to address those concerns when they do come up, because I have seen all too many times in my 15 years down here where the city has very inhumanely addressed those situations. The first one that I very vividly recall was up on the North Riverfront, and there was literally no problem being caused by the folks that were living in, I believe what they were calling a shanty town up on the North Riverfront. And it was absolutely disgraceful how those, sorry, I'm getting a little emotional, how the city can handle those situations. And we absolutely can do better. And I support the Alderwoman for having sparked the conversation again, pushing the conversation forward with respect to how we handle those types of situations. And I do believe that some form of the Unhoused Bill of Rights needs to pass out of this Board of Aldermen. with respect to the other two board bills, there is another system that's broken in the city of St. Louis, and Alderwoman Saunier, pointed to the Platten petition process, being inherently racist, being inherently classist. She's not wrong, but the reality is that we don't also have systems in place to address those otherwise, and the conditional use process, while it might be a little bit better in terms of the process, it's still a broken process. If you're not familiar with the conditional use process, basically someone goes in, they apply for a conditional use. The conditional use gets noticed to the public, and I use that term loosely because it's essentially a piece of paper that gets posted on the property, either in the window or street sign in front of the property. And you have to basically guess whether or not someone's going to read that sign who lives next door or on the block where that business or entity is going in. Many people, particularly in my neck of the woods, they're not going up on someone else's property and looking in the window to see what, if there's a hearing at 8:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning, and what may or may not be happening with that particular property. Most cases. But those meetings happen weekly. They happen 8:30 in the morning, not particularly the most accessible time for people to arrive or participate in a public discussion. I will commend the zoning department and that they have actually started doing those virtually. So that's a big props to the zoning commission, because that actually does make it a little bit more bearable and accessible for people. But 8:30 on a Thursday morning isn't exactly the most compelling time to engage the public in a discussion here. Along with that, so you have the kind of issue with the notification process, the hearing process. You also, on the back end, if there are concerns with respect to the conditional use that's issued, it's very difficult to utilize that conditional use because the zoning department is also inadequately staffed in terms of following up with problems that are identified by people in the neighborhood. And so, there are challenges there. I look forward to, working with the Alderwoman to address some of those concerns, but we need to fix some of these other processes in city government to make these processes work for our residents, for our taxpayers, for the unhoused community as well. But certainly happy that we're having this conversation finally. It's long overdue, and again, I just want to reiterate my thanks to everyone who's participated in the discussion. Thank you.
All right, Alderwoman Vice Chair Saunier, did you have any closing remarks? Okay, I didn't know if you wanted to respond to anything else that was said.
No, I don't. I would just, I kind of already gave my closing, so we can just count that as the closing. I would just say, I would appreciate if my colleagues would just, as much as you can, communicate with me. I try my best to be reachable and be accessible. So the more that I'm able to get information before we have these public hearings, the more I can make sure that they are addressed before we get into this space. That way, what I'm bringing in front of you has your concerns in them.
I'm going to make sure that we announce the next hearing again for the record, the time, where it'll be, so that people will know and be prepared to participate the way they were able, especially the ones that were not able to participate tonight. So we'll have that as an. Madam Clerk, how many written did we? I know we had them. We were not going to go through them, and out of respect for you all's time. But did we have any written testimony that?
Sorry, we had 4 written testimonies that were.
Okay, we'll go over those. In support or opposition, did they say?
Opposition.
Okay. That will be that for that. So please announce the next one, and so that people are aware of the process. You see, I got plenty of notes and questions, so we'll talk when we meet on that. Okay.
The next hearing is set for November 7th at 6 p.m., same place in the Kennedy Room.
All right, I want to thank the staff, publicly thank the staff and STLTV and our marshals as well, and of course, most importantly, the participation of our constituents. and our residents here in the city of St. Louis. With that, I'll accept the motion to adjourn.